Now, what NewSQL is it's trying to take the advantages of both NoSQL databases and old SQL databases, so just regular SQL databases, all right, relational databases and non-relational databases, and trying to combine the advantages of both, right? And hopefully last week you guys learned that non-relational databases allow a level of horizontal scalability that relational databases lack, right? Relational databases don't allow us to scale as quickly as non-relational databases. Now, that being said, SQL databases, relational databases, provide a level of structure. That's why we can use SQL that NoSQL databases don't provide, or non-relational databases don't provide. They give us some level of tabulature, they allow us to interact with the rows and columns, and they provide it in a neat manner. It's also quicker to query on a relational database opposed to a non-relational database because there is that built-in key dependency and the built-in structure that, again, is lacking in something like MongoDB, right? So what NewSQL tries to do is it tries to take the sort of structure of a relational database with the sort of SQL that everybody knows and loves because SQL is, for ages been the language you use to interact with databases. So it basically tries to take SQL, take some type of structure, and throw it onto a non-relational database. So it's going to have a NewSQL database is going to have the availability of SQL as well as the scalability of a non-relational database. And that scalability is in terms of horizontal scaling opposed to vertical scaling. If you want me to give a description of that, I can. But does that sort of answer the question? Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
One thing too, just to note that these students have been taught to manage their environments using Docker as opposed to pipenv. So we might want to walk them through like pipenv. They've seen it in Unit 2, so just a review, sort of like show them, hey, this is how I would kind of create my pipenv and manage a project in that way.
Yeah, okay. I can do that right now. I just started sharing my screen. So again, if there's other questions, I'm going to go ahead and walk through this pipenv stuff, and then you can ask them afterwards. So what is pipenv? Do you guys know what pipi is? It stands for Python Package Index. All right, so if we go to pipi.org, you can see we have find and install and publish Python packages with the Python Package Index. So if I go up here and I look up pandas, right, we're brought up with pandas and all these different pandas packages, right? So when you do pip install pandas, pip install numpy, pip install literally anything, you're referencing this pipi, this pipi website, this Python package index, to pull that package and download it to your local machine so you have access to code that is found within that package, right? And these packages are sort of synonymous with the package architecture that hopefully you guys covered in week 1, all right? So with that, whenever we say pip install something, we're basically referencing this Python package index and installing it to our local machine. Now, what pip environments allow us to do, or Python environments in general, pip environment is just sort of a subcategory of Python environments. It's just a way we can implement Python environments. Is it allows us to create a dedicated location on our computer that holds a specific set of dependencies and a specific set of sort of configurations, right? If you've dealt with any type of Python environment, which you guys have because you've been using Docker, what happens is you can create a small little location on your computer that has specific configurations, specific dependencies. So I can say, I want Python version 2. You get Python version 2 in that environment once you enter into it. And then you also have specific dependencies you've installed into that environment. So containers and Python environments at the end of the day have the same type of theory behind it. It's really just creating some type of environment that has a specific set of configurations, a specific set of dependencies, and just in general allow us to interact with a specific version of Python, right? So that's all a Python environment essentially is, okay? Now, what pipenv allows us to do is use a Python environment, right? And when we do something like, if we go to terminal, if we do pip install something like numpy, right? What we do is we install pip to our machine, right? We install it anywhere we are in our computer. We have access to pip, right? We can say pip install numpy, pip install pandas, and it'll now be available to us in general, right? If we go into DS24, which is the current directory I'm in, if we go into my desktop, if we go into downloads, I'll always have access to NumPy. And, you know, if I do my Python REPL and I do, you know, import pandas, right? This is always going to work. Import pandas is always going to work because it's on my machine, because I've done pip install pandas. Now, if I do pip install, you know, if I exit out of this and I do pip install, or if let's see, where am I at? So right now I don't have something, what's in very abstract package. I can just go to Pippy and find one. Let's go here to, so these are all packages I can install. And let's say I want to install Peach Collector, right? You can go up here and I see this command. I can install Peach Collector, the package, and I'd have access to it just by importing it, right? So if I go back to my terminal and I do pip install Peach Collector, oh wait, I'll import it first. If I say import Peach Collector, Peach dash collector, right? I'm not going to have access to this package because I haven't pip installed it, right? You see that? Oh, oops, it's probably just Peach Collector. My bad. Whatever it is, however we call it. Let's see. Should be down here. Yeah, Peach Collector. So it's just import Peach Collector. It doesn't exist, right? We need to actually install it. So I can go ahead and exit out and I can install it directly to my machine, or I can use pip environments to install it into a dedicated environment. So I don't always have Peach Collector on my local end, right? Does that make sense? So I can instead do pip end install. This will create a dedicated environment in the current directory that I'm in. And if we go ahead and get a look at what we don't have anything in DS24. I'll go ahead and open it up and see, there's nothing here. It's empty, right? There's nothing in this directory. All right, so if I go ahead and do pip end install, this is basically just going to create an environment. Look how it's just adding env to the end of pip. It's basically just creating an environment in this directory in which I can install things just to this directory, not to my whole computer. All right, so if I do pip install Peach Collector again, pip install Peach Collector, I'm going to install this package into my environment, not into my local machine, right? So installing Peach Collector, blah, 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 it's going. Now I'll show you guys why this is really cool soon enough once it's finished installing. But now I can activate this environment by doing a command called pip-end shell. It'll activate this environment for me, and I can now use Peach Collector. And the moment I exit out of this environment, I no longer have access to Peach Collector, right? So it's just found in this environment, just in DS24. And once this is finished locking, I'll go ahead and describe what files we now have in DS24 that allows us to have access to these packages, right? Again, it's installing dependencies. So now if we look, we now have pipfile.lock and pipfile. So pipfile is sort of the user interface that sort of allows us to see what kind of file or what kind of packages we have installed. We have Peach Collector, and then the version of Python we have, and then some other information up here. It's referencing Pippy, again, the Python package in text, to install Peach Collector, which is up here. Again, if I'm moving too fast, please ask a question, verbally call out, because I don't necessarily know where you guys are leaving off, and I want to be sure that what I'm doing isn't extremely confusing or fast. So if you want me to slow down, please say something. Or if you have a question, please say something. Again, this is just going to be a general Q&A, and then we'll get into the Flask application later on.
We've got a question in Slido. Would you like me to relay that, or?
I can pull it up. If we are already comfortable with Docker and PyCharm, would you still recommend we switch over to pip-end and VS Code? No. Honestly, if you want to keep using PyCharm and Docker, feel free. Again, at the end of the day, it's more of a personal choice rather than anything else. Docker is nice too because you can download non-Python dependencies. You can't really do that with pip-end. So if you're comfortable with Docker and PyCharm, it might open up more doors than just using VS Code and pip-end. So again, just keep using that if you feel like what I'm saying now transfers over to Docker and you're able to do it on the same level. But if you're not comfortable with it and you've been really confused, then yeah, definitely feel free to switch over to pip-end and VS Code because it is a little bit more intuitive than what you guys have been doing. Thanks, Taylor, for calling that out. So as I said, this pip file is basically just a general description of the packages I have installed. While up here, this, where is it? This pip file.lock is going to be a JSON a JSON file. Essentially, it's going to be in JSON or JavaScript object notation, and it's basically going to explain to the computer what dependencies need to be installed. So these two files basically define our pip environment, right? And if you see up here, to activate this project's virtual environment, run pipenv shell. Alternatively, run a command inside the virtual environment with pipenv run. So we have Python shell, which is basically, or just Python, which is going to give us the Python REPL, but pipenv run will basically give us a Python REPL that is utilizing the pipenv dependencies, right? So peach collector in this case. All right. So if we go ahead and I won't clear it up for you, but if I go pipenv shell, right? Boom, launching environment. So virtual environment was launched. We are now inside that virtual environment, which means if I go into a Python REPL, I could also do pipenv run if I wanted to. They're going to accomplish the same thing since I'm already in my pip environment. If I do Python, I can do import peach collector. Hopefully that's the right call, and it will need to be import peach collector. All right, how do I import this? Can you explain?
There's a dash in between.
Oh, there's a dot.
There's a dash.
A dash. Well,
Yes.
I don't think that's going to work. It doesn't accept that notation, as you can see here. You can't import with dashes in the REPL. I might need to wrap it in something. But again, I can just go up here and see how they want me to reference it. Where is it? Here we go. Let's go to the home page. This will bring me to it's in GitLab. All right. Well, let's see. We don't have documentation up here. Libraries.io. How about I just install something else? What else we got? JSON formatter. Okay, cool. This one should be a little bit easier to reference. All right, so I'm gonna just install this one, I'm gonna exit my Python REPL. I'm gonna do pipenv install JSON formatter. All right, I'm just gonna install it again, and then we can access it by doing import JSON formatter, right? And now again, I'm not gonna have access to this in my general computer. Instead, I'm gonna have access to it just when I'm in the pip environment using pipenv shell. So again, I'll show you this demonstration once it's done locking. It's almost done. I'll say Python, and I can do import JSON formatter, right? Similar to importing something like pandas, right? I've imported JSON formatter, so I have access to it. Now, if I go ahead and exit out of this, and I exit out of my REPL, and you can exit out of a REPL just literally by leaving the directory. So I'm now in sprint 3, which is the directory that DS24 is in. I'll go ahead and show you guys that. So you have DS24, which is you guys. We go in here, we have the pip file and pip file, blah, blah, right? I'm out of that now. I'm in sprint 3. If I go ahead and enter into my Python REPL, and I try and import JSON formatter, I'm still gonna have access to it. Now, the reason that this is, and I know I said, oh, well, once you leave, aren't you gonna lose the pip environment? Well, you need to actually sort of directly exit out of the pip environment if you are still in one of the parent directories, which is important to know. So let me show you how we can do this. And I'll just open up a new terminal, side by side. So I have two terminals here, right? If I go ahead and enter the Python REPL, and I do import JSON formatter, no module named JSON formatter. Now, why is that? It's because we're not in our pip environment, right? We haven't done pipenv shell. If I go ahead and I navigate to where we currently are at, I go into unit 3, which is you guys. I go into sprint 1 or sprint 3. This one we're on. I go into DS24, which is, oops. And I go ahead and I activate the pip environment, which is exactly what I did up here, right? This is the same environment. If I do pipenv shell, I'm going to activate my environment. And if I do Python, and I enter in this command right here, or this Python code, import JSON formatter. You can see Oh, I have an unexpected indent, but it should import because again, there we go. We now have JSON formatter. I can go ahead and take a look at it. You can see it is a module. That's because we've entered into our pip environment using pipenv shell. Now I'll go ahead and send the documentation for this as well, just so you guys, if you want to later on, can get familiar with it.
I'm also very familiar with this whole process, unlike the Docker workflow that John was teaching. So if you guys need any help, I can support you very quickly with pipenv. So just let me know.
Yeah, and if you're using Docker and, sorry, I can answer this question now, but if you're using Docker and PyCharm, I can also help you with that. Again, I'm not super familiar with PyCharm. I don't ever use PyCharm. I typically only use VS Code, which is, I'll show you what that looks like. Now, you also probably don't have access to the code command if you haven't downloaded it. But if I go up here and I do code, open VS Code for me, there's obviously something similar. My O key has been super sticky recently. It's kind of annoying. But you have the code command here, right? And I have my pip file and pipfile.lock, which is, sorry if I'm bouncing around a lot. I just want to cover a lot today. Which is where I'm here right now, right? Pip file and pipfile.lock. So all I did was open up the VS Code using this code command that you have to set up in Mac, and I think it's automatic in Windows. And I think you have to set it up in Linux as well. But again, we're just using relative imports to open the current directory that we're in, right? Or relative path, my bad. So I open up VS Code. This is VS Code, right? We're pipfile.lock, which is just all JSON format in JSON format, and then we have a pip file, right? I can make a new file here. It's just a general text editor, you know, similar to you know, something like PyCharm. All right, so I can make Python files, I can import JSON formatter, right? And I now have access to JSON formatter. So it's all there, right? Because I'm, again, coding inside DS24, coding where this pip file and pipfile.lock is. So my computer knows that this is a dedicated Python environment, and I have access to JSON formatter and peach collector as well. And if I want to dive into the documentation of peach collector, I could import it as well. I'm surprised it's not just peach collector, but maybe it's something else. Yeah, so again, I now have access to those two things. All right, and we can uninstall things.
I just wanted to say real quick, I just posted a link that will give you guys the instructions if you want to set yourself up with VS Code the same way Nick has with the code space dot. So follow that if that's what you're doing. And the other thing, I'm going to post in a second the attendance code. So thank you, Murat, for reminding me to do that. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for that, Taylor. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and see if there's any questions on the Slido. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and explain the process of building a container with Docker and PyCharm. Now, the issue here is, I don't know how John had you guys do it. I can go ahead and if you want, we can go back to this. Did you guys go into this Docker playground thing?
No, they set up Docker they set up a Docker container, and then they were using the configurations available in PyCharm to change their Python interpreter to go through the Docker container as opposed to their own like machine. So that is how that worked. I would say though, the likelihood of you knowing the ins and outs of all of the configurations in PyCharm that would allow that to happen, I just don't know that that would be the best use of our time though. It's just...
Yeah, again, I don't use PyCharm. So like I can help you if you show me, I can probably figure it out intuitively. I haven't used PyCharm in a while. But the process of building a container with Docker is the same as it would be, you know, for PyCharm, for VS Code, for anything. I'm assuming you're using some type of CLI, you know, like you're using the Docker CLI, right, to interact with with PyCharm, right? You're using a Docker CLI. So if you do Docker -- version, you have Docker available to you, or are they using are you guys using like just the PyCharm interface?
Nick, I got a question.
Yeah. Oh, hey, what's going on?
Nothing much. How are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
Pretty good. Glad you're back. What is the most common IDE in the industry of like data science? What have you seen?
VS Code typically. I mean, that's the most common interface for probably for any industry in computer science. I mean, I'm sure a PyCharm might be up there as well. I'm not really sure. I can just look it up. Let's see. What is the dominating data science? Yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody I know uses VS Code. So we got, let's see, Notepad. Okay, Spider, I guess I was wrong. PyCharm. Bonnie, Atom, is VS Code last? And then that's actually surprising to me. Interesting. All right, wait, let me go back. Let's see. I'm not going to trust data camp. But yeah, I mean, I guess PyCharm's pretty popular just because they have a good amount of workflow and built-in dependencies for data scientists. But at least in terms of personal experience, most people I know use Visual Studios. Again, that's just, I think I use VS Code because it's pretty wide ranging, and PyCharm gets annoying for me just because they have a bunch of stuff that I don't want to do. And they like, I don't know. I don't like using PyCharm just because it sort of blocks me into a box. I feel like VS Code doesn't as much. But again, if you're just doing data science, maybe PyCharm's not a bad idea. But Visual Studios will forever be my go-to unless something better pops up. Yeah, so VS Code, PyCharm, Atom, maybe Spider. I don't really know anything about Spider, so can't really speak for it. But yeah. So I mean, you use VS Code, don't you?
I was using it until our other instructor hopped in. He was using PyCharm, and I didn't know what would be best for working like with Docker containers.
Yeah, I think PyCharm has a nice interface for Docker containers. I will say that. But again, I think it locks you into a box. So you can use Docker containers with VS Code, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's just a little less intuitive, which, I mean, I don't even know if it is. I haven't really done it too much with VS Code, but I'm sure there's plugins and stuff you could look up.
What do you mean by PyCharm locks you into a box?
So I guess it doesn't necessarily lock me into a box. I don't like using PyCharm because I feel I just, again, it's more of a preference thing than anything, guys. I don't want to sound like I'm hating on PyCharm. I think it's great. I just like VS Code more, to be honest. At the end of the day, it's more just personal preference than anything. And at least when I'm coding in PyCharm, I don't know it as well as I know VS Code. And I guess me saying it locks you into a box is more personal than anything. Obviously, if you know PyCharm better, I'm sure it doesn't. I know VS Code better. I've been coding in VS Code for a while. So I feel more confident using VS Code. So I kind of misspoke there. It's not locking you into a box. My bad. It's just
okay, no worries. I'm just curious as to your experiences because you have them and we don't.
Yeah. Well, alongside that as well, I think like with VS Code, right, I have all these extensions, right? I have a bunch of extensions. PyCharm has a bunch of extensions as well, a bunch of add-ons, a bunch of things you can use to implement into your IDE, right? That's most text editors do. Atom has that, Spider has that. So I guess in general, I typically like VS Code's extensions for specific things rather than PyCharm's extensions. And I feel like PyCharm's extensions are the ones that I have used because, again, I haven't used PyCharm nearly as much as I use VS Code. So I'm kind of ignorant to the question in the first place. But I think that they've always sort of forced me to code in a certain manner. And I feel like VS Code hasn't. Again, that's kind of an abstract answer, but yeah, that's again,
it's a good answer.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So I use VS Code. You can use PyCharm. I'm not going to insult you if you do. So, yeah. Cool. All right. Any other questions, guys? Anything about pipenv? Again, I kind of went through that kind of quickly, just because we're going to be using it to push the Heroku. But anything else? feel free to throw them in the Slido as well if you guys have
Also,
it.
yeah, you guys, if you have not gotten the the API application all the way done or approved, message me and I'll help you with whatever's left to do.
Yeah. Again, you can just, what the heck? Why isn't this working? Oh, that's why. Okay. Yeah. So make sure you set up the Twitter API or apply to the Twitter API. Taylor can drop the link and you guys can just go ahead and it's pretty cookie cutter information. They're just going to ask you like, oh, what are you using it for? Oh, I'm a student. And then they're going to say, what do you want it for? And you just say, oh, I'm to code things. Like really, as long as you're going to get granted access, as long as you don't put anything nefarious, like, oh, I want to use this to, attack people or some type of, or unless you say you're involved in some type of terrorist organization, you should be able to get access to the Twitter developer's account. They're not super restricted on with who they grant access to. So yeah, make sure you fill that out because we're definitely going to need that by Thursday. And I hope John was as persistent as I am about signing up for the account. Yeah, okay. So any other questions, guys?
Did you say we're going to be using pipenv to push to Heroku?
Yeah, so typically you use a requirements.txt or a pip environment or something else to push to Heroku. So again, we can talk about this more on Thursday when we cover it. But if I do, something like pipenv, Heroku basically has a nice integration with pip environments where it's like we can sort of take pip environments and Heroku will sort of read our dependencies. And with reading those dependencies, it'll add them to our Heroku application because Heroku runs off of Docker containers. They call them dynos in order to push our application and scale, which again, we can talk about on Thursday, but there's a nice sort of connection between pip environments and Heroku. There's also, we could also use requirements.txt, which basically does the exact same thing. So yeah, that's essentially kind of why we're going to be using pip environment. It's just sort of a convenient way to get the dependencies onto another computer so we can host it on the cloud. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just thinking about like managing the rest of this week and which one we should use. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Again, if you don't use pip environment and you're using Docker and PyCharm, you can just use requirements.txt and it'll do pretty much exactly the same thing. And hopefully I have time to talk about it on Thursday as well. So yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Is there any other questions that you guys want to throw into the Slido or the Slack? After this, we'll probably take a short break. And when we get back, I'll show you guys how to connect, give you a breakdown of like what a web application is and just like in general sort of introduce you to this stuff and we can code a single page application.
Yeah, they both said they want to come.
Sounds good.
Cool. Any questions at all or are we good? We'll take a little 5-minute break and then we get back. Again, if you have a question during the 5-minute break, feel free to throw it in the Slido or the Slack and I can answer it when we get back. But I'll go ahead and start it if there's nothing else. So I will see you soon. Yeah, cool.
5 minutes?
Okay. Yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah.
Cool. 5 minutes, guys.
Cool. See you when we get back. Okay, we are back. So now I'm just going to give you guys a rundown. Give you guys a second to come back. But now I'm just going to give you a rundown of basic sort of web architecture and like what a web application even is. Okay. So let's see. So let's see. Let's go to, I don't know. Remember, we just go to this documentation. Actually, you see this? You see this little URL up here? See this URL up here? Oh, we got a question. I'll answer this first and then we can get into it. This can be answered later if needed, but is there such a thing as too many pipe M's in your directories? Where should the shell begin? Yes, that is actually a huge issue. I probably should mention this if you guys are going to use pip environments. Do not nest your pip directories. Okay? Do not nest your pip environments. All right? Do not put multiple pip environments into the same location on your computer. That means I should not have a pip environment here in the Sprint 3 directory and a pip environment in my DS24 directory. That is not good. That is not good at all. So in general, we want to only have one directory for one pip environment for one directory, right? And we don't want pip environments in the directories inside those directories, right? Kind of confusing, but don't layer your pip environments, all right? Another important thing I should probably discuss before I get into web architecture is how to remove things, okay? So let's say you see we have these two packages we installed. We have Peach Collector and JSON formatter. So I can go ahead and delete them by doing pip and uninstall, right? And then I just do the name of the package that I want to uninstall. I want to uninstall JSON formatter. Boom, it'll uninstall it. And I need to do pip and uninstall. It's not as good as just going into the pip file and deleting Peach Collector or JSON formatter. That's not going to do anything. The pip file.lock still has the information of JSON formatter, and it will still download it accordingly. And you're also going to get into an error because the pip file doesn't match the pip file.lock. So now we need to do pip and uninstall peach-collector, and this will uninstall peach-collector. Just because we're going to start coding in Flask now using this DS24 directory. I encourage you to do the same thing in terms of your setup, because right now we only have pip file and pip file.lock. I'm probably going to make a repo by the end of the day, push that, share the GitHub repo with you guys so you have access to this single page Flask application we're making. And also typically I have two terminals up just because it's nice to navigate between the two. So you can see the sort of dimmed opaque one is the one that I'm not currently in. If I click on this one, I'm over here. Yeah, you guys hopefully get that. But let's go into web architecture now. So if we go to some, just any web page, right? What is a web page? What is a web application? What does it mean when I say web application? So you guys know applications, right? I have Spotify down here. I have Slack. I have, all these different things down here in this menu bar. And all this essentially are applications, right? This is a Finder application. This is a Google Chrome application. This is a Spotify application. This is a Slack application. All of these are applications. They're not web applications. They're just applications, right? Now, typically with applications, you have to download them, right? Or they come pre-installed. But the actual software that gets the application running needs to be hard downloaded to your computer. When I download Spotify, or when you download Spotify, or anything else, what's an application I can download? I'll go to Spotify. Hopefully I'm not logged in. But if we go to Spotify, I have to I have to come up here and hit download, right? I have to hit download in order to get it downloaded onto my system, and then I have to open the installer and download it, and then it becomes downloaded onto my computer, right? That is a typical application, right? And I had to do that with all of these, well, except the ones that are coded into this Mac, such as messages, maps, and photos. But I had to download, Slack. I had to download Zoom. I had to download SQL Pro. I had to download all that stuff through either the App Store or through my web browser. And this sort of begins my introduction into what a web application is. A web application is essentially just an application that's hosted on a web browser, right? So Google Chrome is what? Google Chrome is a web browser, right? Firefox is a web browser. Internet Explorer is a web browser. You guys are familiar with web browsers. You interact with them, I'm assuming, on the daily, right? So when I come up here and I enter in some type of URL, or if I go to this URL, I visit a web application. Or if I go to Slido, I visit this web application. Or if I go to, Google, this is technically a web application, right? I mean, with some obvious nuances, but this is a Google web application. I'm currently on a Google web application. Weird to think about because you think Google and browsers to be sort of, in general, Google is the way you navigate around the web, but at the end of the day, Google, this sort of interface we have here, is technically a web application. And all the web application is a application that can be accessed through the browser, and you don't necessarily need to download it onto your computer. So what is the difference between a web application and a regular application? Why do people use web applications? In general, what is the main difference? Well, as I mentioned beforehand, when I go to Spotify or when I go to any of these other sort of things I've downloaded, even web browsers, you have to download to your computer, right? You have to download it to your computer, right? That's what an application sort of, that's how you get it running, is you have to download the source code to your computer and get it up and running so that you can open Spotify, have access to it. It can make calls to some network so you can get your songs and all that stuff. You hard download it onto your computer. Now, a web application sort of skips that step. And all we technically have to do is go to our browser, I'll go to something a little less difficult to understand than Google, but we go up here to this sort of web browser, right? We go up here to Flask.palettes project or whatever we want, or whatever URL we visit. What's happening when we visit this URL is the browser sending a request to the network through our IP address. We're sending a request to some server in which, flask.palletsproject.com is hosted. We send a request to that server in another computer. We get that source code. That source code is brought back to our computer, and now we have access to it, which is why we need internet in order to use web browsers. I'm sure you guys have realized that. If you haven't, it's a common thing. You need internet in order to use your web browser, right? You got to go on Gmail. You're gonna need some internet to back that up and make that network call to get back the Gmail application. So all the source code isn't stored on our local computer. The source code is instead stored on a server somewhere else, right? And we make a request using URLs and using URL endpoints to get back the information that we want, right? So if I go ahead and go view page source, this is the HTML defining the Flask application, right? We have, blah, 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 Nixon's, language, style sheet, JSON.parse, related, all that kind of stuff. And we can see we have welcome to Flask documentation. So if we go up here, we got welcome to Flask documentation, right? We got this source page right here, and HTML is basically just a skeleton that defines the text, the images, and all the skeleton information or the architecture of the actual application here, right? So we even have an image up here as well, which is probably going to be this. You can see I can click on it. We have the text sort of defined in the source code. Now, what happens is when I visit this URL, this flask.palletsproject.com, and I go to this URL, I'm requesting the source code back, and they send me the source code, and I load it through the browser. So this source code, unlike Spotify, is not stored on my machine. Instead, it's stored on another server that I access through these endpoints. I'm sorry, I think I've said the same thing about 4 or 5 times, but it's important to understand. And what's cool about this is the same reason containers are kind of cool, is that, a while ago, I'll use an example. A while ago, what had happened was that, Apple ended up changing the chips that they use in their infrastructure, right? They switched to ARM chips, right? And what they needed to do was they needed to let developers that sort of code Spotify, Slack, all the other apps that we find down here, or all the other applications we need to download to our machine, they need to tell them, hey, we're switching hardware. You need to know that we're switching hardware so that your code that sort of runs off of this hardware that's downloaded to our Apple machine or our MacBook, is accounted for. You need to account for that change so that your software doesn't break, and you can push out a proper update so that you can update the applications that are found in all these new MacBooks that are going to come out so that the application actually works, right? So that's really interesting because there's sort of this dependency now that the application has on, with the hardware. If the hardware changes, the application probably needs some type of update. Or, maybe or I keep saying Mac, maybe Apple rolls out some new update for their actual machine. Developers of Spotify and all these other applications, including browsers, need to account for that change, right? they need to account for it because it's running off of the hardware, it's running off the source code of the computer. Now with a browser, we don't necessarily need to account for that, right? All of the source code is sort of stored on the server. I don't need to re-download or update a software or some type of application that's on my computer because all of that is found on a browser. And I make a reference or a call, network call to that source code that's on that other server to get back that information and load the web page, right? So let's take Gmail, for example. Gmail didn't really necessarily need to account for the ARM chip, right? They didn't need to account for that change. They didn't need to account for the hardware change that Apple was making because their software, their application runs on another server, and we're just making a request to that server to get back the same source code, right? What did need to change though, when that chip was changed, when the hardware changed, was the actual Chrome browser itself. Or if an update is rolled out for some MacBook, you need to update Chrome because it needs to account for those changes. You don't need to update Gmail. You can go onto Gmail as long as you have a browser on your phone, tablet, or anything. It's sort of device independent in the sense that the web application doesn't care about the type of device or the type of operating system you use. Instead, it just cares that you have the browser downloaded so you can access the source code in a different location. Does that make sense? That's what a web application is. And any web application has some type of URL with a location of the source code that you reference, right? Does that make sense? Is there any question regarding that? Share my favorite coding playlist on Spotify. Oh, I will 100% do that. I have like 50. I'll send that in Slack later. Keep it up so I can share it with you guys. Yeah, is there any questions about web applications or applications in general? Because it can be kind of confusing if you don't necessarily understand how network calls are made or what a server even is. So I'll give you guys a second if you have something to sort of send a message into the Slack. Okay, cool. No questions? That's a good sign. So if there are no questions, then we're going to go ahead and start making a Flask application. Okay. But how about I go ahead and explain just a brief overview, because I don't want you guys to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript experts by the end of this week. That is an unrealistic goal and one you should not strive towards as a data scientist. But I will give you a brief description of what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript do in terms of web applications, because that is the language of the web. When you build a web application, it's using HTML, it's using CSS, and it's using JavaScript. Almost undoubtedly it is, or PHP or something else, but at the end of the day, it's compiled into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, okay? And I already sort of gave an explanation of what HTML is, but essentially, this is a lot of HTML. All HTML is basically the layout of the website, the general skeleton of what it's going to look like. You put your images in here, you put your text, you put you put your links, just very basic information that isn't super complex, right? All these words are basically stored, all the information that it sort of describes these words is stored in the HTML. Now CSS sort of stylizes it, right? There's not many colors here, but if we go to Slido, this blue, this sort of QR code color, all of this stuff, well, this isn't an image, but all these different colors and all this different stuff, all these like effects that we hover over, it's like sort of fades a little bit when I go over this. If I click on this sort of pops down. These colors, it's not the action of actually popping down, but it's the colors associated with the text in HTML. CSS provides the styling, all right? So CSS is the beauty on top of this HTML, this plain, non-impressive HTML, non-stylized HTML. Now JavaScript is basically the logic that holds it all together. When I come up here and I click on this drop down, JavaScript is allowing that to work. JavaScript is allowing me to drop down this pop down. It's allowing me to click on create, pop up this thing, go to quiz and type in information and send it and make posts and get requests, right? So JavaScript basically defines the sort of logic and interactions that take place on a web page. If you go to Gmail, hands down, they probably entirely rely off of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. no matter what the web application is, I guarantee you they at some point use one of those or all of those languages. You have to. It's what makes web applications. If you at Lambda, when you want to become a web developer, they learn React, which is a framework, and Flask is a framework as well, and I'll describe that soon enough as too. They use a web framework to code JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to make web applications. Web developers make web applications, right? Web developers don't make software applications. Software developers make the applications we find on our local machine. Web developers make web applications. Software developers make software or apps, right? And so again, apps is a bit of a blurry word, but software. Spotify is a software. Slack is a software that we download onto our machine, right? So I've been referring to these as applications, not web applications, just applications, but technically they're software applications. At the end of the day, that's more of the technical term, right? So I'm going to continue to call these software applications, or I will start calling these software applications and start calling these web applications, okay? Yeah, so one last thing before I get into it, we're going to talk about frameworks, okay? What is a framework? So if we go up here, we look up framework, we have web dev. We see we have a collection of different frameworks, and there's a bunch of them. We have Django, which is a Python backend. We have Ruby on Rails, Angular, Laravel, Express, Flask, Vue, and React. I'm surprised Vue and React aren't first. But yeah, all the web framework is basically a collection of tools that allow us to make web applications faster. You can see Flask is one of them. Flask is a web application. It's a micro web framework, or not a web application, sorry, it's a framework. It's a micro web framework, which means it doesn't have as much functionality as something like Django, okay? And front-end code mainly relies off of JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, the stuff you see on the web application. But there's also back-end code, and we'll talk about more of this tomorrow. The back-end code can either be in JavaScript, Python, or some other type of logical language, right? Flask and Django have a Python backend, which is why we're able to skip over the JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Well, not entirely. We're going to be coding HTML and CSS in the next few days as well. But essentially, it allows us to code Python for the backend and sort of create a web application using Python, right? And that Python, again, I'll sort of talk about the nuances with that in the next few days, because again, it does boil down to JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for the front end at the end of the day. Django uses Python backend as well. Now, this is opposed opposed to something like Vue or React that use JavaScript in the backend, right? So Flask and Django use Python backend, which is why we can code, because we know Python, and Vue and React use JavaScript. Okay, so that makes sense. We'll sort of get an understanding of the different architecture, and I'll explain what Flask actually provides us when we're coding in that framework. All right. So how about I stop talking and how about we actually start coding? So I'm going to navigate to my terminal. I'm going to get rid of one of these windows, and I'm just going to be coding around in the terminal for the next few minutes. So I'm going to clear this up. You can see I have my pip file.lock. I'm now also going to, let's see. So we want to install a few dependencies we need. So I'm going to pip-env install Flask SQL Alchemy, and let's install python-.env. And that'll be it for now. And I'll install pandas. Actually, I have pandas on my machine. So the other thing too is when we enter these pip environments, we still have access to some of the general dependencies we've installed, like pandas or NumPy. So I should still have access to those. As a safe measure, it might be important to install them so that Heroku knows about it. So I will. So I'm going to say pip install Flask SQL Alchemy, python-.env, pandas, and NumPy. Actually, we'll avoid pandas and NumPy because I don't even think we need it in the single page web application. We'll probably need it in TwitOff tomorrow, which is the application we're going to be building. So I'm going to copy this, share it with you guys, and we're just going to be installing this stuff. It's going to take a moment. I'll share it with you right now. So we're just installing it into DS24. And we're going to be using that to create an application. Okay, it's going to take a second. And I'm going to wait while it does that. Okay. And while that's happening, I'm going to create a quick GitHub repository. And we're going to call this DS24 single page. Again, you don't really need to follow along too hard in terms of creating the repo. I'm going to just using this to share it with you guys. You don't need to create a repo if you don't want to. A demonstration of Flask for DS24. I'm going to make it public. I'm going to add a README. Or do we want to README? Nah, I'll echo a README. So I'm just going to leave it like that, create repo. And then while you guys are finishing installing this, because I don't know how quick you guys' computers are, I'm going to go ahead and just initialize this as a repository. I'm going to create a DS24 README. I'm going to initialize it. I'm going to say git add README, just going to be my first commit. I'm going to say git commit -m. I'll say first commit. Oh.
So
First
what
commit.
is showing you guys right now is how to basically take an existing directory on your machine and make it a GitHub repo. I recommend if you want to do this on your own, just starting from the GitHub GUI to build the repo. So, but you guys will totally come back to this whenever and rewatch this whenever you guys need to figure out how to do this, because it happens all the time.
Yeah, this is very common. I don't know if you guys have encountered this yet, but it's definitely important to know how to do. Just because, like you saw, I didn't create a repo and then add information to it. I instead created created a project and then added a repo to it. So this is how you do that. And as you can see, once I visit this link again, I now have my README, and I'll add the rest of the information we have by doing git add, so the pip file and everything can be there too. -m, adding pip. Cool. And then I'm just gonna go, whoa, what happened here? Do I have, it's kind of weird looking. Do I want to remove dark theme? See, I had dark theme on for GitHub, and now it just says this weird thing because they added dark theme like a couple weeks ago, and now I just have 2 dark themes, and it sort of does this weird stuff. So I'm gonna turn it off real quick. Go to dark theme. Yeah, refresh this. Ah, it's so bright. Should we, do you guys want to know how to do dark theme? I'll show you how to do this real quick. Go to your profile. Where is it? Where's settings at? Edit profile. No, that's not it. How do we do dark theme? Ah, settings, of course. Makes sense. How to do dark theme.
It was on that. It was on your profile page.
Oh, it wasn't my profile page.
There's a little slider in the top right. If you go back one.
Oh, if I go back one. Okay, appreciate it. Oh, it's up here. That's right. That's what it's at. Sweet. Okay. I can't code in light theme, guys. I'm sorry. It would have bugged me if I didn't change it. Okay, so now we have this. And as you can see, my pip file is now there. And I've updated my pip file, and you can see I have Flashback, SQL Alchemy, and Python-.n. We're going to be using SQL Alchemy today. All SQL Alchemy is, I'll share this documentation with you as well. All SQL Alchemy is a way we don't have to write documentation. Is a way we don't have to write SQL. We can just write Python. Very powerful. I recommend you check this out. I'll give you guys an introduction today, but we're going to be using it throughout most of the week. And this is the Flask documentation. I think I sent this to you guys, but it doesn't hurt to send it again. Cool. All right. Now we've sent the Flask documentation. And now we're going to actually start coding. Actually, I should probably add one more piece of information here. I'm going to go set add file, create new file. We're going to add the MIT license. should do it automatically. All right, hold up. Oh, wait, shoot. I don't want to upload file. Create a file. We want get. I could ignore. Did I not have my thing downloaded? Okay, maybe we won't do this now. I'll do this later. This is just a waste of time in terms of what we should be going up. So I'll get my GitHub up and running today, so you guys are at the same page and you have my code. But how about right now we just go ahead and make a single page web application. So I'm going to go ahead and say code dot open up my VS Code. You can see I now have my README, my pip file, my pip file.lock. I'm going to create a file just by doing touch, and we're going to say touch example app.py. Okay, go back to VS Code. I have my example app.py. I'll create a doc string, and we'll call this. No, I don't want to update VS Code right now. And we'll say an example of a single page Flask application. All right, cool. Save that. And now we're going to import a few things. Okay, any questions about what I've done so far? Okay, so if there are no questions, let's see. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's many. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and continue what I was doing. So I'm going to go ahead and import Flask, or from Flask, import Flask. So I'm going to say from Flask, import Flask, and then I'm going to say from SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. Never spelled this right the first time. All right, import SQL Alchemy, we got that. What is this complaining about? Oh, I need Flask underscore SQL Alchemy. There we go. That's better. All right. So here are my two unused imports. And how about I import one more thing? We're going to import request, which is basically going to allow us to make network requests. And we'll see why this is important later. Because again, this week's going to be about APIs and building pretty quick applications. All right. So requests is going to allow us to make network requests to URLs, URL endpoints. All right. And brief description of what URL endpoints are. It's just, you know, when you have something like blank.com, anything that follows that .com is technically considered an endpoint, and it's sort of how information is parsed out on the web, right? Sort of follows the same sort of directory thing, right? We have slash some information, slash some information, and I'll show you guys more about that when we actually make a request to the open notify API. But for now, just disregard this and import it. We're going to talk more about Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy right now. So we're going to go ahead and start by initializing our application by saying app equals Flask name. Okay. Okay, so this is going to initialize our app. Now, again, in the documentation, what your assignment is going to be today. Now, again, don't follow the README that we have laid out. Me and Taylor will provide you a message in the Slack with a breakdown of what you should be doing for your assignment. But all I want you guys to do today is sort of go into the Flask documentation that I sent earlier, I think twice, and go through this. What does micro mean? So this little article right here, and check out general installation and build a minimal application using Flask. Alongside that, I'm also going to send you guys a quick article and a quick general introduction to Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy. And by the end of the day today, you're going to create another Flask application similar to the one that we made today that is pretty basic. Again, we're going to be doing the hard stuff in the next couple of days. So again, this is sort of Flask is providing us with the documentation or the structure for how we should create our app. And this is one of them, right? We need to say app equals Flask name, or name. And we can see, if you guys remember from week one, hopefully John mentioned this, but name is essentially It's just a Python internal that basically points to what we're kind of doing or where we are currently at. And it says right here, you should use name because depending on if it started as application or imported as module, name will be different. So if you ever done if name equals main, which I hope you guys have, basically main is main basically name is set to main if we run python.py, right, or some file.py, right? If we actually run the Python file, name is going to be set to main. But if we import it, name is going to be set to something else, which is why we can sort of avoid running the code within the if name equals main statement if we just import. But it runs if we actually run the code, if we actually run the file, right? This is sort of using that as well. It's just basically saying the application exists here using Python internals. So the leading and trailing underscores indicates that this is something that is found inside of Python, inside of the Python architecture, right? Now we have all this stuff. We have a little app route. I'm pretty much just going to be copying this and showing you guys what this does. So if I go back to VS Code, and I do @app.route. Now, how familiar are you guys with routes or with decorators? I mean, my bad. Because I'm sure you guys haven't encountered them too much. But all a decorator does, and I'll make this a part of your guys' assignment as well. I have a really nice article that sort of explains it. All an app route is a or all the decorator is a sort of modifier that you can attach to a function. So, and it's indicated by this @ notation, right? This little @ sign. This this @ sign, right? This is indicating a decorator. And I'll say that right here. @ is a decorator, is Python decorator notation. Okay. So this is a decorator and it's modifying the hello world function. This @app.route, this is something that's provided by Flask. Now I said, remember that Flask allows us to make applications quicker. So this app.route has some source code. And when our Flask application is actually run, this decorator is going to be given to us by Flask. And it's going to allow us to create URL endpoints, okay? And that URL endpoint is specified here. I promise you'll have an understanding of what this means when we actually run the app, right? So right now we have this app.route, a function beneath it, and this return hello world. So let me show you what this does. So I'm gonna go ahead and navigate to my terminal. So I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna clear this up, and we have our example app.py. I'm gonna first activate my pip environment because remember, that's something that we need to do if we want to use these dependencies we have. And we are using those dependencies. If you see in the example app.py, they're all right there, right? So I'm going to go ahead and activate my pip environment, and I'm going to say Flask app equals, and we want to point to our application. Our application's right there, remember? So we're just saying, we're basically telling our terminal, telling Flask where our application lives, and it lives in example app.py, right? And then after that, we're going to go ahead and say Flask run, and it'll run. We go back and issue, no Flask SQL Alchemy module. Let me see if we do in fact have it installed. I mean, we should. I downloaded it. Flask SQL Alchemy, Flask SQL Alchemy. Let me go ahead and see what's going on. Okay, did I spell something wrong, or am I just made a mistake? Okay. Why is Flask SQL Alchemy not around? SQL Alchemy. Maybe I have to activate my pip environment again. Okay, let me try and run this again. Flask and bash, Flask run. From piece, Flask SQL Alchemy, no module name, Flask SQL Alchemy, line 5. Let me just get rid of this for now. We can solve that problem later, right? That's always, we don't need it. Let me just show you guys what this does. Let me pull up Chrome, and I will navigate to this new URL that was given to us by iTerm. So you can see that we have here HTTP 127.0 blah blah blah. So this is now being locally run off of our machine. It's not hosted on the cloud. When we visit this endpoint here, we're visiting some location on our current machine. We're not making requests to some server. I could do this without Wi-Fi. I could turn off my Wi-Fi and I could make this request because it is being hosted where? On our machine. So I hit enter, you can see I have hello world. We go back to VS Code. You can see that that is what I'm returning here. So this is basically getting turned into HTML code, right? It's in a very archaic sense. That's kind of what's happening. Well, all we're doing is returning some text string, all right? Now I could change this to something else. I could say this is the // route. Right, I could do that. And then I can make another route and we'll call this. And notice how I'm visiting this endpoint, right? And I get back hello world. Now I could also make another endpoint and we could call this some or in endpoint. Okay, and this is the blank endpoint. All right, now if I go ahead and I go back to terminal, I have to rerun this since I changed the source code. I hit enter. Oh, I have two hello worlds. I need to change this to something like an endpoint. There we go. If I rerun this now, you should see I get back the local host. If I visit this again, VS Code, you can see I now have, this is the blank route. All right, notice how this is the route that I'm currently at. I'm at this endpoint. This is essentially our domain. You can sort of think about this as a .com thing, right? The domain, that's what this is. This is the domain. This is the domain. Notice how it's white. This is red. This is the domain. This is the domain. I think you guys get the point. This is the domain. Or well, this is the domain. Now, if I go ahead and say an endpoint, what's going to happen is we're now going to have, instead of it saying this is the blank endpoint, we're going to have this is the blank /end endpoint. Notice how that is the string here and the string here is different. And again, I'll show this again. We go back to this. We now have this is the blank. So this is how I can load pages dynamically using this @app.route call. So this is very, 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 very simple compared to more complex web applications. But at the end of the day, we're printing something out on some type of endpoint, and that's really cool. Now, Flask allows us to do this. Now, it would be a pain in the ass if we had to go ahead and do @app.route and code out that entire thing, make that decorator, and make it so that when we access a specific endpoint, we then go to that endpoint and execute this function. This is being provided by Flask. This is being provided by Flask. These two things are being provided by Flask, okay? They provide us that code for this @app.route decorator, and it allows us to use it with hello world, okay? So now let's make this a little bit more interesting. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and we are going to actually reference the URL, reference the open notified data. First, I'm gonna initialize my SQL Alchemy database. So I'm going to go ahead and go up here and say app.config, db SQL Alchemy app. And you go up here and say from SQL Alchemy or Flask SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. Okay, I think I actually did import Flask SQL Alchemy from SQL Alchemy. I think that was a mistake I had last time, which is why it wasn't working. Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It looks like it's working now. Maybe I just misspelled something. That seems to be a common issue I have. So what this is doing is, get rid of that. What this is essentially doing, this app.config, is it's creating a SQLite database for us. It's setting the database URI in the correct location, and it's saying, initializing the SQL using this using this database thing. All right, so we're using this DB object. We're saying DB equals SQL Alchemy app, and it's saying SQL Alchemy equals app, right? So that's essentially what's going on here. Is we are using SQL Alchemy to initialize our application. Okay, initialize our database with our application. All right, so SQL Alchemy and our app now knows about this database that exists. That's essentially what's happening here. And again, if we go back to the documentation, you can see that that is right here. You can see that this is the Flask SQL Alchemy. We go to the quick start guide, and this is how we initialize a database. Okay, it's using SQLite. We use app, same kind of notation here, and we can create a database table using some interesting notation that I'll show you guys right now. So I'm going to go to the bottom, and underneath all this, I'm going to make a user class. I'm just copying it from the SQL Alchemy documentation. But essentially what this does is this creates a table. This is going to be creating a user table. And again, we're using SQL Alchemy at the end of the day. So when we're using SQL Alchemy, we have this weird type of class notation. And again, I encourage you, since we only have 9 minutes left, to navigate to the Flask SQL Alchemy documentation today, take a look at it, get an understanding of what's going on. Obviously, I'm going to be explaining it to the best of my ability within the last 9 minutes. But like I said, the assignment for today is getting familiar with both of these tools so that we can start coding the TwitOff application later today. So if we go to VS Code, I'm going to give a little description here. We're going to say create user table. So when we run this application, what SQL Alchemy is going to do is it's going to notice that we have a class user here. It's going to inherit from db.model, which is the initialization we've put up here. So we're initializing using the SQL Alchemy import that we've imported, saying SQL Alchemy app, passing in our application, initializing a database at this location in our computer, and then referencing that model, referencing the model class to sort of create a table, okay? So this is, again, SQL Alchemy notation. So this is similar to if we wanted to, and I'll write a SQL equivalent right here, say SQL equivalent. I'll just give a SQL equivalent since hopefully you guys are semi-familiar with SQL. We'll say we want to create a user table, and then we want to create a specific set of columns. So if we go to SQLite notation, I just want to make sure I'm doing this right. SQLite notation, we want to create table, right? Go here. We are just going to copy this. We don't want that one. We'll do this one. No, we don't want that one either. We'll do something super simple like this. So I'll go back to VS Code. And the SQL equivalent for this would be something like create table, user. We're not going to use user. And then with ID, username, and email. Okay. This is a DB integer. This is a primary key. Again, this is all equivalent to writing SQL queries. It's just in this situation, we're using SQL Alchemy notation opposed to using actual SQL. And this, at the end of the day, will be converted into SQL for our SQLite database. Okay. And now if we go down here, we also can set this equal to varchar, and we'll say variable characters of 80. We want it to be unique and we want it to be null. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this unique thing. We don't want to focus on that, but it's basically just saying we need unique usernames, but not null is basically what this nullable thing is doing. And we're going to do the same thing for email, except I'm going to make it 120 characters. So I'm going to say 120. Okay. Not null, email, username, ID. Fantastic. It's looking good. I need to change all of this db.column thing to db. All right, so we have db.column, db.big, db integer. I'm going to call this, I'm going to use the data table big integer. All right, and I'm going to keep it as string, and this is looking good. But now in order to access the Astro data, and we'll probably do this tomorrow in the beginning of class, actually make an API call, I'm going to create a astronauts table. So this is creating an astronauts table. So it's no longer a user table, it's an astronauts table. And look at that, when I change the name here, it's going to change the name of the user table, and it's going to be Astro astronauts. Okay, so I now have created a table called astronauts with an ID, username, and email column. Okay, this email or this ID is the primary key. Now, the reason that we can use SQL Alchemy and the reason that we do is because it's SQL independent. You notice when I went to the browser and I had to look up how to create a table, I looked up SQLite notation. Now I could have done MySQL notation or Postgres notation, and it probably would have been different. The nice thing is that we have access to any dialect. And depending upon the database we use, in this situation we use SQLite, it will convert this code into the proper SQL syntax. All right. Now, again, all of this stuff can be found on the Flask SQL Alchemy documentation. It's all there. I recommend you take a good look at it. We will be talking about it more tomorrow when we actually dive more into what SQL Alchemy is doing, how to create a database, and how to actually make a network call to Open Notify. We'll be doing that tomorrow in the beginning of class. But right now, we have a class astronauts database. All right. And we'll sort of break this down a little bit more, but essentially I want you guys to get familiar with this for your assignment and get familiar with this app route notation that we've been using that is also found on the quick start guide in this Flask documentation. Let me send this to you guys again. I sent it 3 times now, so hopefully you have it. Again, me and Taylor will be providing a Slack message breaking down the assignment for today. But is there any questions in terms of what we've done? Any questions in terms of the sort of complicated notation that I sort of ran through pretty quickly? But again, the point of this is to make sure that you get an understanding with the assignment. The point of the assignment today is to make sure you get an understanding with the Flask application and the SQL Alchemy notation. Okay, so this created a database for us, created a SQLite database. Now, if I go into my terminal and I exit out of this and I rerun it, let me clear it up first, I guess. Say clear it up. I'll do Flask app equals example app.py. We can see no module name Flask SQL Alchemy. For some reason, I'm still getting that error. Why is that happening? Let me do pip shell. It's already activated. Let me go ahead and let's see why it's deciding to do that to me. So let's go to the actual documentation and see what the download looks like. So if I go up to here, where's Flask SQL Alchemy? From Flask SQL Alchemy, blah, blah, blah. What is going on? I have my Flask SQL Alchemy downloaded, right? Yeah. From Flask SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. All right, that's looking good. Let's see. Let's do install Flask SQL Alchemy. Let me just copy this and try and reinstall it. Pip install Flask. Pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. Okay. Should already be installed. Maybe I made a mistake and I did all lowercase. I doubt that's a huge issue, but now I'm going to go ahead and activate my pip environment again. See what's going on. And now I'm going to do Python, or no, Flask app equals example app Flask run. No module name SQL Alchemy.
Sometimes whenever you have 2 like modules that are similar and one of them's broken, like both of them are broken.
I'm probably going to fix this up today. I'll share the source code with you guys in the GitHub. I'll share the GitHub link. But again, Taylor and I will provide you with the explanation of what the assignment should be. Again, it's really just going to be making sure you get familiar with Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy so we can move forward tomorrow and be a little bit more precise and in depth with what SQL Alchemy actually does. But yeah, for now, that is lesson. Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I know this is kind of confusing considering there's been a new instructor and I don't necessarily know where you guys left off. So my apologies for not being super specific with what's going on, as well as not sort of, sort of everything feeling like it's last minute. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you have any sort of issues, also feel free to reach out to me or Taylor. So enjoy your lunch, and I will see you for office hours today. And if not there, I'll see you tomorrow. So goodbye, guys. Nice to meet all.
And I'll give you more information on that guy too. Alrighty, see ya.